Okay, so we looked at ingestion, deglutition, the buccal phase. Now let's do this. We're going to actually, oh, let me hide that one. Let me hide this one. We're going to look at what's happening in the pharynx. Okay, so the pharynx, its job is propulsion. That part of propulsion is basically deglutition. And this is going to be the pharyngeal phase. Okay. So for the buccal phase, make sure you go back to like some of those 22-30 videos and remember all the mouth muscles for chewing, for swallowing. The same for the pharynx muscles. You want to go back and look at where those muscles are located. Okay. I'll try to insert them somehow into the YouTube video if I can figure that out. So we're going to pass by the mouth. Now we're going to start looking at the pharyngeal phase of deglutition. The first thing we're going to go over is we're going to go over the pharynx structure, okay? So the pharynx is a common passageway for both food and air. It is a funnel-shaped tube that connects to the nasal cavity, the oral cavity, and to the larynx. It has three partitions or three parts. This first part here in blue is called the nasopharynx, right there. The nasopharynx goes from the end of the nasal cavity and then ends right here at the uvula, which I forgot to put on the other PowerPoint. Basically, this is the soft palate. The end of the soft palate is the uvula. It's that little dangly part at the back of your throat. Okay, so that's the end right there of the nasopharynx. The oropharynx is the green portion here, and it is basically posterior to the oral cavity. It's the end of the uvula all the way here. Usually it's about to right here. This little flap, if you recall, this is the epiglottis. If you're not quite sure what that is, then I'll try to also insert the video from last semester where we looked at the larynx structures. This is a cartilage that's part of the larynx, okay? So this is kind of the end of the oropharynx, right there. And then we can say purple here. Purple is the laryngopharynx or the laryngopharynx. This is posterior to the larynx and is going to be continuous with the next part of the gut tube down here that I'm going to put in red, and that's the esophagus. So you should see that the esophagus is posterior to the larynx. Which means our airways in front. So this front part here, this is the larynx. And then it becomes the trachea. Actually, like, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of trying to do this really fast and I shouldn't do that. So this part right here is the larynx. And this part is the trachea. Okay, so we went over this in 2230 a little bit as well. So hopefully that's just a brief review. So let's look at the pharyngeal phase of deglutition, because the whole point of the pharynx is that I can move air and I can move food. Air should come in through the nasal cavity, go through the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, the laryngopharynx, and go towards the trachea. Food has to go from the oral cavity, which now we had our bolus previously, right? And our bolus is starting to move towards the oropharynx. Essentially, in the pharyngeal phase, I want to make sure that my bolus ends up going from the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx, and I'm starting to push it to the esophagus. So here, the first thing is that really is going to happen is that our bolus, our tongue, pushes the bolus to the oropharynx. And if you're like, but wait, wasn't that the other part? I mean, yes, this is the last part of deglutition, the buccal phase, okay? So in order to make sure that the bolus goes in the right direction, essentially what has to happen is the nasopharynx contracts. And it's going to close off the nasal cavity. So basically the soft palate, okay? Oh, that's why I was like, wait, what? That makes no sense. I'm sorry, let me erase this. Not the nasopharynx, the soft palate. The soft palate's going to move. And when it moves, it's going to close off right here, basically, so that the bolus is going to go into the oropharynx. Then what we're going to have is we're going to have some pharyngeal constrictors. They're going to start to contract sequentially. Basically, the superior ones contract, the middle ones contract, and then the inferior ones contract. And what this is going to do is it's going to push the bolus all the way towards the esophagus. And I'm not quite sure like what order this happens in. It's an ordering thing is not so, it's not something you need to worry so much about, meaning I'm not going to ask you what happens first, second, or third. I'm just putting 1, 2, and 3 to kind of make it easier to remember. Okay. Another thing that has to happen is you're going to have all of these neck muscles here, superior and so suprahyoid and infrahyoid muscles. Really, you're going to have your suprahyoid muscles. Those suprahyoid muscles are going to help us push our epiglottis down. So I'm going to say help move glottis and close, move the epiglottis and close the glottis. If you don't remember, this little slit right here, that's the opening, that's the glottis. Okay. And in this case, then the bolus basically moves into the esophagus. So you can see how the superior pharyngeal constrictor, which is going to be like right about in this area, and the middle one is about here, and the inferior one's a little bit lower. The superior pharyngeal constrictor contracts first. Suprahyoid muscles probably contract next, pulling the epiglottis down. And then the middle and inferior pharyngeal constrictors will basically contract next to help us push the bolus into the esophagus, bypassing the glottis. Okay, and then you have to also understand that infrahyoid muscles, the infrahyoid muscles contract to bring the glottis back to the epiglottis back into place. So we're going to say infrahyoid muscles return the epiglottis to the non-swallowing position, which means the glottis is open, okay? So all of this should be like kind of a review from what we did in 2230. I'm just going into a little bit more detail. So what that means is now the bolus has moved into our esophagus, okay? So the next phase of deglutition is going to be the esophageal phase.